These words are written by a loving brother, Seymour, to his writer brother, Buddy. Do you know what you will be asked when you die? But let me tell you first what you won't be asked. You won't be asked if it was published or unpublished. You won't even be asked if it was the one piece of writing you would have been working on if you had known your time would be up. I'm so sure that you'll get asked only two questions. Were most of your stars out? Were you busy writing your heart out? If only you'd remember before ever you sit down to write that you've been a reader long before you were ever a writer. You simply fix that fact in your mind and sit very still and ask yourself, as a reader, what piece of writing in all the world Buddy Glass would most want to read if he had his heart's choice? The next step is terrible, but so simple I can hardly believe it as I write it. You just sit down shamelessly and you write the thing yourself. Oh, dare to do it, Buddy. Trust your heart. You are a deserving craftsman. It would never betray you. Why does it take such courage to create something after your own heart? I think it is because what you write after your own heart is of your image, is essentially of you. And you can't hide from it, and you can't hide behind it. You cannot hide from its imperfections, its limitations, its failures. What you create reveals who you essentially are. Do you know who my first readers are? Let me first tell you who they're not. They're not my cousin Bob, nor my older sister. They are people who know me, people who I would trust with my life, who I'm not afraid to appear before naked, in the most profound sense of that word. They are people who love me. And the reason I trust them is that they love me. They love me enough to give me permission for me to do this thing that I must do, for me to tell my truth. And I know this precious group, which is very few, will also tell me the truth. Have I got it? Did I nail that story? Did the penny drop? Was I writing my heart out? Christ in the Apocryphal Bible, according to the Apocryphal Bible of St. Thomas, is reported to have said, if you bring forth that which is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth that which is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. The people who truly love writers get this. Get that without doing what a writer does, must do of necessity, the writer will die. Now, advocare, advocate. It comes from the Latin vocare, to give voice to speak for those who cannot tell their own story. Every time I write a pleading, I am sustained by my clients who tell me how much it meant to them to read back their own story, to know they've been heard. Last week I had the privilege of attending a criminal trial of where the complainant was an 11-year-old girl who had been sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. At the time she testified, she was 13 years old. And initially, her mother had suppressed going to the authorities, although she knew her obligation was to try to protect the public from a person who could perpetrate this act again. She thought firstly of the best interest of her child, and she had been a court reporter for 7 years and did not want her daughter to be dragged through what is a very defective, flawed system. But the daughter took the choice out of her mother's hands when she herself went to a teacher and told the story and then told the story again to the vice principal, and then to the principal, and then to the CAS, and on and on and on. And by the time she had arrived in the courtroom to tell the story, even within the context of the trial that I audited, she had told the story like the Ancient Mariner probably hundreds of times. How much courage could it take that little girl, who was 13 years old at the time she testified, to tell that story? And in front of the eyes of the perpetrator, and then to be subjected to cross-examination on that story. I thought to myself, that little girl will be empowered the rest of her life. A reliving of a story digs you deeper. It augers you to the bone.
Well, I guess it is a question. In your opening, when you were describing your relationship to the relative in relation to your book, many of us have gone through this experience.
Everyone has always heard, write what you know. Okay. And the moment you touch what you know, you cross the line between fiction and reality, and you're into libel territory, libel and slander territory. But I'm always encouraged when I hear, for example, Mark Twain was a very autobiographical writer. I had no idea about that. And most of us don't know that. We can't know that because they're dead. Like, very few living writers get to stand up here and unapologetically say, yep, I stole that story, and yep, that was my aunt. So, you know, it needs to be out there. When I was in law school, I self-interestedly did a thesis that crossed two of my subjects, constitutional law and tort law. And it was on libel law, fiction, and the Charter of Rights. And I was exploring whether the freedom of expression in the Charter, which came out that year in Canada, would give a writer of fiction a defense if ever sued. And in the context of doing the research, I was staggered at the number of US writers who had been sued by family members, brothers and so on and so forth. And it's a very dangerous topic, and there is nothing like the threat of litigation to shut someone down. My son said to me when I was mourning the loss, really, of my two sisters over this book. Fortunately, my mother and my father still love me. But my sisters didn't talk to me for 5 years. And my son said to me, he was very young at the time, "Mom, tell them to get over it and tell them they can just write their own book." And of course, it's only my truth, and that my truth might appear libelous to someone else. You know, part of that letter that I didn't read out to you, Charlotte Bronte wrote an apologia for her sister Emily Bronte, which is the introduction to some copies of Wuthering Heights. You can't get it in all copies of Wuthering Heights, but it's an absolutely fascinating piece of writing because Charlotte Bronte, who was herself a writer, didn't get it. She was apologizing for this monstrosity, Heathcliff, who her sister had created. I don't think Heathcliff was a monster. I think Heathcliff was passionately in love. At one point, I was almost hoping Bob would sue me because perhaps by that, then my book would get some notoriety. And at least I would become, you know, might become financially viable as a result. You know? I can't give up the day job, though. I'm still doing it. So, I want to thank you, Maria, for giving me this opportunity to reconsider and to contemplate what it is I am doing. Usually I simply do it. And I want to thank you, my audience, for receiving and considering and engaging with my story. For the I, without that direction of you, is like a character in a directionless journey.